Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be doing a quick recap of Visitor Studies Association's conference. If you are not familiar with the Visitor Studies Association, it is a professional organization of evaluators across all museum and organization types. If you ever get a chance to go, it feels like evaluator summer camp to me, where you get to see all of your friends and talk about evaluation and get really excited and really nerdy about methods. So if you ever have the opportunity to go, I do highly recommend it. But as we realized, not everyone can go, and it's a really great community. We have asked people who had presentations at VSA to come and present today. So we are going to do the quick hit version, recognizing these were all like hour-long sessions, and we've asked them to condense it down to about 7 minutes. So we can just jump into that with a vibe check experience design for visitor studies with Megan
Hi, I'm with Victoria too. Let me
and
share my
Victoria. Thank you.
share my slides. Okay, everyone can see this. Woo. Okay, Victoria.
Okay, there. It just showed up. I was like, I don't see it. Okay, yes, my name is Victoria Threadgill. Megan and I are at Space Center Houston, and then we presented with Dolly Haid at COSI. So yeah, our presentation is Vibe Check, Experience Design for Visitor Studies. And essentially, you can go to the next slide, Megan. Yeah, essentially in this presentation, we are focusing on creative ways to design evaluation methods that center the guest experience and that maybe add to it instead of detract from it. So I'll pass it on to Megan.
Okay. So a first example that we talked about was Moonwalkers, which was an immersive film experience at Space Center Houston about the historic Apollo moon missions. And so it was narrated by Tom Hanks. The whole theater was renovated for this experience. And so obviously this was like a big investment for Space Center Houston. And they wanted to do an evaluation to like gauge guest reception and also inform future museum offerings. And so the fact that this was a film experience figured like pretty greatly into how the evaluation was designed. And so I'll show you the space. If you look over to the right of the first picture, you can see the entrance. And then the second picture is where everybody came out. And so they could come down the stairs or to the walkway beside the stairs in like this huge rush. And so we had to figure out how do we deal with like movie timing and try not to detract from the fact that this was in fact a movie experience. So we didn't want to hit people with like a huge survey and be like, fill this out now that you've enjoyed the film. So we did two different methods. The first method was a really short survey that we rebranded as a movie review. And so we gave it to the design team here at Space Center Houston. And we said, hey, can you make this like look a little prettier? And so they did. We made sure that it was really short to, again, preserve that experience and not feel like they're like having to like fill out this long thing after a movie. We found out really quickly that this table was not enough space to get all of the survey answers that we want in that big rush. And so we started handing out a bunch of clipboards as well as people came out to get as many survey responses as possible. And then also, we did interviews to get a deeper dive on some of the other evaluation questions we had. And something that was really interesting about this is that giving people that chance to reflect on their movie experience added to their movie experience. So letting them process like, hey, this is why I liked the film, was really cool to see people say like, oh yeah, I did like it. And this was the reason why. And it was really special. And so there was that adding to the experience as well. And that was really exciting. I'll pass it to Victoria to do the second example.
Great. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about more visual appeal and using that in my approach here. So with this method example, it was more of a front end test, and we were wanting to do some topic testing to understand what type of activities we should run in this family-oriented space where our education team basically runs exhibits that mimic experiments being done on the ISS. And there are many experiments being done on the ISS, lots of research within different areas. And so we kind of took the liberty of, having so many topics you could choose from, and we ended up testing 10 topics. So to do that, we actually created a comic book because we wanted to hear from children as well as adults. Megan, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so we created a comic book, and each comic represented a topic of research. So as I mentioned, in total, we had 10 topics. We realized very quickly that was way too many topics to test at one time. We ended up splitting them in half. So we had a comic book first edition and a comic book second edition, and we flipped a coin each shift to see which comic book we should use first. And then halfway through the shift, we switched the comic book. So we asked the guests to read the comic book and then rank their most favorite and their least favorite comic with some sticky notes. After they did that, we asked them if we could ask them a couple questions about their choices, and we gathered a lot of information about why their topic was their favorite, why their least favorite topic was not their favorite, if they were already familiar with the topic, and what they already knew about it, as well as what were they curious to learn more about. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so when we were thinking through how to design the comic and what art to use, we were kind of, curious about, should we anthropomorphize all of the characters, or should we add some real NASA researchers in there? We ended up using a pretty equal mix of both, and we found that it didn't really influence the guests' decision on if something was their favorite. They never really mentioned, oh, I like Tissue Chip because I like Terry, I like the character. So they were actually talking about the topic itself. So we knew that the method was working. But yeah, I really loved this method. We got a lot of information about it. But yeah, that's it. That's it for this example. I'll pass it back to Megan.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this justice. Dolly had several examples. I'm highlighting this one, but please reach out to Dolly if you want to hear more about her creative methods, because she has lots of really, really cool things to say about it and lots of things that she's done. So this one is about a reflexive tracking interview that they did at their museum. And so they gave guests this little map tray, and they had them like map out their experience after they had gone through the museum. And so Dolly talked a lot about the idea of making sure that something is usable for the guest, but also usable for the evaluation team after. And so preserving that ability to like look at the data while also making sure that it's engaging for the guest. And so she talked about things like the fact that this magnet couldn't be too big or too small, too strong, like hard to come off the tray, the fact that the metal tray was needed to like make sure that you could use the magnets, that the magnets were matte so that there wasn't like a gloss when you took pictures of the mapping later. And then she also talked about the fact that like she wanted this to be attractive, but not too like colorful or kid-like, because they wanted adults to participate as well, and they didn't want the adults to feel like this was like an infantile activity. So they had to think about this balance between like, hey, what makes sense for the guest, what makes it easy for them to use, and then also how do we do this in a way that makes sure that like we can gather data and analyze it effectively later. And so with that, I will pass it back to Victoria to talk about our workshop.
Yeah, so we had a workshopping time within our session, and we created a methods planner, which if you go to the next slide, Megan, you can get at this QR code. All of the resources, including our examples, are within this folder. But the methods planner essentially walks you through step by step how you can plan a creative method. Maybe it's not creative, maybe it's a black and white method, but whatever it is, it helps you to cater that method to the guest experience at your specific institution. So yeah, with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, Megan, or Dolly. We would love to answer any questions that you have. And yeah, thank you so much.
The end.
So great on time. condensing it down so quickly. Next up, we have Data as a Bridge with Matt Kennedy. And we'll collect the resources so we can send them out in an email afterwards.
Hi. Sorry. Okay. I'm Mac Kennedy. I'm at the Lawrence Hall of Science. I'm a senior research lead, I think is my title. Been there about 15 years. So data as a bridge, that's what I'm came to talk to you about. It's our presentation around the projects that's been supported by the Institute and Museum by IMLS. It's around integrating our internal processes to better serve our priority audiences. And I need to click on this one. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Lawrence Hall of Science, we are the public science center for UC Berkeley. We inspire and engage in science learning and discovery in ways that advance equity and opportunity. This presentation is around how we're trying to think about what we learn through our process to better serve the audiences that we're aiming to serve, specifically priority ones. Our audiences include educational systems, which are like schools and systems of districts. We do that through professional learning, creating networks. We reach worldwide learners. We are mostly through our curriculum materials, about 700 or 7 million users of our curriculum materials a year. And for Bay Area families through our brick and mortar science center experience and our outreach programs around community-based science. My colleague Seth is here, and he's going to correct most of what I say. And so this is the agenda that we talked through at VSA. This is structured around an activity that people did at VSA. I'm going to just talk at you, though, today in the 7 minutes. But really, it's around understanding what are data silos or these islands, and then challenges to creating, to moving data across these silos or sea monsters in your organization. So I invite you to think about these things as I talk this through. And then how are you building or might build bridges to better meet the mission-aligned goals within your institution? And then to how will different staff use data to that flows across these bridges to inform their practices, and then learn and share with others to collectively build capacity to take into action in your institution. Glad I just read that slide to you. Okay, so the history of our project and support from IMLS, we call it harnessing data, and we think about it in 2 ways. One is around staff growth. So we're developing professional learning sequence and opportunities for our staff to work with and learn from data better, to embed evaluation and reflection in our regular process of our work, and then building a more transparent data culture so that it's not feeling like it's just being used for accountability. And really where we're going to be able to institutionalize that change is through systems change. And that's around strengthening some of the priority relationships with our prioritized audiences. And for us, that's Latine, Black, and Ohlone are the First Peoples of the East Bay communities within our area, and that we want to align the feedback that we get through these different data sources into action as an institution. So we really see these 2 parts around our work. So why do we need to build bridges? We recognize that data, we have these data islands where data it accumulates but then stays there. And so we really recognize that we as an institution were data rich, but insight poor, because we can't draw insight across these different data sources. And so we really wanted to identify, our colleague came up with the idea of these archipelago kind of idea of these individual islands. And we really just want to build this infrastructure of bridges across these islands. And so to just sort of talk through some of the data islands that exist within our institution, we have these in community engagement island, we have marketing, we have visitor experience, and then we have our studies and evaluation islands where data can accumulate and does not get shared very well across. But this is what we're trying to build and grow within our institution going forward. So here are those data islands, and here's our sea monsters in between them. We're trying to build these bridges across them. And I wanted to sort of talk through a little bit more and spend more time with this second case study to talk through what this may look like within an institution and why we're doing this. So we have a program called Lawrence on the Go, and it's a outreach program. And this program was successful, but the system supporting it was under strain. And we didn't recognize where the problem was so much, but within the institution, it was seen as an expensive endeavor that was considering being cut within the institution. And so we had these different sources of data around the impact that it was having, but we didn't understand the whole picture of the program. Once we were able to draw insights across the different islands and then interpret across this, what we realized is it's not a failure of the program, it was a failure of the institution to support it. So rather than cut the program, it's actually a further investment in a salesperson to support the interaction with schools. And now the program is able to be saved and financially sufficient. And so we were able to draw this insight across the institution. So what do we mean by building a bridge? That it's not just about, the goal isn't really just to build this opportunity to share information across islands, but to really maintain our ability to collaborate with one another using this bridge as an institution or as infrastructure. And during the session, we gave everyone an opportunity to sort of draw their own islands here, and monsters and bridges and ferries, and we saw some really cool artistic creations there, much better than our science museum made. But I wanted to spend a little bit more time with the lessons that we've drawn for ourselves through this process, and that the relationships are really what's critical. And there's not a CRM that's going to solve this, that it is not a technological solution, that really around we need to build our collaborative meaning making, so that making sense of data is an ongoing practice, that we need to navigate friction that comes up when people are sharing data that feels like an accountability of their work or a measure of their impact. Navigate those and redirect it around aiming for better serving our priority audiences and aligning with our mission. And then the systems of action that we're really trying to change our processes. And through that process, we've recognized we need to make mind shifts within our institution around understanding that I really like the language here, that away from data being a performance metric to a cultural asset for us as an institution. And just the key takeaway, the goal is not to build a bridge, but to use the bridge as a collaborative to collaborate across the islands and transform organization into a unified learning ecosystem. Our handouts were handouts, so I guess I could send PDFs to you, Allison, to share as a resource for people who want to draw them by hand.
Great.
Seth,
Thank you, Beth. I would have really enjoyed that session. And keep us moving with exit surveys, tips and tricks for success with Beth, Rachel, and Chris. Who's steering?
Beth has got our slides, and I'm just going to kick us off with some framing. So we did an exit surveys, tips and tricks session. You can see that Elisa was on our panel. She's not on the call today, but Beth, Chris, and I are here. So I'm Rachel Lindsay, Research and Evaluation Officer at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the Momentary in Bentonville, Arkansas. And we did this session. It's a pretty basic topic, but we do feel that it's important to remember that our colleagues are in all different stages of their career, and there are many folks at VSA who could benefit from this type of session. So it wasn't all about COVES exclusively, but we are all COVES sites. We thought it would be helpful to compare our sites and share what we've learned about data collection. And we did get a bunch of questions from the audience, things about like, what should I say to my visitors? How do I respond when they have questions or concerns about the survey? How do I think about sample sizes? And all of that really just demonstrated that people are in at different points in their journey with COVES or with exit surveys in general. Remember that the COVES team and this community of practice are always available as a resource to you, whether we are new to COVES or a COVES expert. So I'll jump into my slides. I shared some background about Crystal Bridges. We opened in 2011. We're free. We have paid temporary exhibitions, but the permanent collection is always free. And we've been doing COVES since 2019. We also do COVES at our smaller contemporary art space down the street called the Momentary. So we have COVES at both sites. Next slide, please. So I mostly shared, or what I'm going to share today is about how to maintain a positive guest experience. So I put this into 3 buckets, making it easier for guests to understand what is happening with your survey and how to opt in or out of doing it, as well as increasing the accessibility of your survey and showing appreciation for your respondents and creating a moment of surprise and delight for them. So what making it easy might look like is helping them understand exactly how to opt in or out of what you are asking for. This could look like ending your intercept script with a question to prompt a response. So instead of saying, we're doing a survey, where they might look at you and go, all right, cool, bye. End with a question is my advice. Say something like, would you be willing to help us out by taking the survey? And then they can say yes or no. And that kind of prevents an awkward deer in the headlights moment. Next, make it accessible. The main piece of advice for making it accessible that I shared is around using a QR code. So not relying on the QR code, not using it as your primary method of data collection, and not leaving it unattended. We know that unattended QR codes do yield few responses that are often polarized. Those are going to be your people who had the best day of their lives or a really bad visit. So offering a QR code mostly as a backup option for those people who refuse due to time constraints, group concerns, they need to get their kid home for nap time, things like that, offering a QR code for them. And ultimately, it's an accessibility tool. It can be used with screen readers. They can take it over to their preferred seating, and they can just take it however they would like. The image there is a picture of our stand setup. We've got the QR code printed out so people can scan it along with all the information there for them. And my final tip was to make it fun. So consider offering a small token of appreciation to respondents. At Crystal Bridges in the Momentary, this has looked like stickers, postcards, pins, other cheap items from your museum store. And a big one, just any leftover promotional materials. Check your filing cabinets. Someone's probably got something that you can hand out to people that will just offer some surprise or delight. And I also made the distinction that the item should keep value in line with the time and effort required. So for a survey, it's a smaller token of appreciation or perhaps a drawing. If you were doing a more time-intensive type of data collection, then maybe that could look like a gift card for an interview or a focus group, but just keeping in mind that it should be in time or in line with the time and effort required.
Okay, so I'm Beth from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. So to frame this, I want to welcome you to Exposition Park in Los Angeles. Here's me, the Natural History Museum. I am the only full-time evaluation staff member here, but I have a team of 3 to 4 part-time data collectors who administer COVES. We've been doing it since 2019. I also have a neighbor, California Science Center. You'll hear from Chris in a minute. And one key tip of mine is to use visitor behavior patterns to inform data collection locations and times. Well, this is fun for us because there's a few other things going on in our park, like 2 other museums, USC football games, the Olympics will be here, we got soccer, and then, people can park in different places, and they can also ride the train here, and they can just be walking around. So that makes this a bit of a challenge. Easier said than done, right? So one of the things we have to predict is where our visitors will exit. We have 2 official exits, but we set up 3 different survey locations, 2 inside, 1 outside, and use different furniture to fit those locations, including an umbrella for outside. For scheduling, our logic is the people who get the close parking spaces at our north entrance are likely the first to leave, so we usually start there. Our physical spaces can be challenging. I'm going to highlight one issue here because of time and universal applicability is weather. It rains, it gets hot outside, it can get hot inside this glass pavilion we have. We have air quality issues sometimes. A couple little things that actually got praised for the other day. We have these small battery powered tabletop fans that are really useful. We also allow our staff flexibility. If they're uncomfortable, they can move to a different location. But possibly the most essential challenge is the human resources one. Collecting data can be a difficult job. Turnover is really challenging. So just a reminder to first choose the right people. Be very clear in your job postings about the part-time hours, irregular schedules, other quirks of the position. And then to retain staff, try to facilitate team interactions. Opportunities for the teams to connect in person also helps with morale. Whenever possible, I offer data collectors opportunities to participate in other projects at the museum, and those have been some of their favorite experiences and I think have helped retention. So Chris?
Hey everyone, I'm Christopher Landeros from the California Science Center. I'm the Visitor Evaluation Coordinator, and we've been in the COVES program for about 2.5 years. Um, Again, neighbors to Beth at the Natural History Museum, so we do encounter a lot of people just walking around, many events, especially during the fall with USC, a lot of soccer games, handfuls of concerts during that time too. So the one thing I did want to speak about is our scheduling. I'm the only full-time paid evaluator at the Science Center, so I do rely on volunteers. Um, the other staff I do get assistance from is our education department. I am housed with the education department, so I do have staff that do assist me every now and then, but it's only whenever they do have the time. For our areas, since the Science Center is free admission, we only charge for the special exhibits or the IMAX. The one issue that we always have with our museum is that we never know when people are leaving or entering for the day. So for our north entrance, which is right here next to our FA 18, that is outside. So staff are usually located outside. Again, weather conditions are the things that change. So if it's too hot, which has been the case lately, they've been wanting to move to the south. It's totally fine. So we try and like balance it out with them. So if they do want to switch out to the north, I'm usually okay with standing out in the north, so I'm always out there too. Our other entrance is the south entrance, which is located next to our Explorer store. If you see on the photo, we're kind of like standing next to that white pillar in between the Explorer store. That's usually where our radius where we actually stop and speak to people. So every month, I do create a randomized schedule. Our shifts are 2 hours long. The entrances are assigned randomly, and I provide the schedule to our volunteers on email, usually on the 20th of every month. Um, since the volunteers are just providing their free time to us, I let them sign up for whatever days that they want. But my recommendation is always to hire volunteers that have more than one day available, just because they do maximize how many people go out there. Next slide. So for the again the survey shifts, 2 hour shifts at random. We did do from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. This is more effective because our museum does open at 10 o'clock. I would go out there at 11 sometimes and just not find anybody for a while. But every now and then I do still step out there, just you never know. Um, so our monthly survey hours that we schedule, I've been tracking it since we started. And if I do hit our surveys within 28 hours of surveying time in the month, which is also doubled since we do go out in pairs, I do the same the next month, the next year of April. Um, so that's how I usually make sure that like I'll hit the quota, we get enough data. typically when I am falling short, that's when I do add more days at the end of the month. And if I don't get volunteers to sign up, I usually go out there myself. Our refusal rate at the Science Center is 55 to 65%, and we usually speak to about 334 people. I did let staff start collecting people that just say, no, I'm actually just cutting across to get to the Rose Garden Natural History Museum, which we do kind of get a lot of, or people that are just going to USC. So I make sure that we do talk to everybody. And again, the one thing I would recommend is recruiting volunteers. This is our flyer that I posted out there. It's always good to just talk to other volunteers that are within the Science Center and let them know, like, hey, if you have 2 extra hours at the end of your shift, you could always help us out. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all. All right, up next we have Courtney with Uplifting Children's and Families' Voices Through Evaluation Choices.
And I should have done this on my PC instead of my new Mac because I'm now trying to figure out how to get my system settings to allow me to share. Interesting. Window. You might want to skip me and I'll come on the next one. I'm going to sit here and try to figure out how. I apologize.
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't want to take because I
we
know
will come back to that. So
okay.
that would be from Findings to Insights with Bryn. Are you ready?
I am ready. Yes, there we go. Okay. So this is a presentation from myself at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the Momentary, as well as Carolyn from the National Gallery of Art. This is a 2-hour workshop that we did, just kind of to Mac's point, thinking about sites that are data rich, insight poor. How can you kind of identify insights through storytelling? There we go. Oops. These are all Carolyn's beautiful illustrations. I've taken out some of the fun animation, but imagine these rocks and little gems are flying across the screen. But our kind of main thing that we were looking at is how do you turn a finding into an insight? So how do you go from that data source to kind of that polished gem? So thinking about what stood out to you in the data, what's surprising, making comparisons, and in all of that kind of messy process, what's your point? What's your so what? How are you kind of distilling all of that data to a story that you can share with folks? So I skipped a slide. Sorry about that. So a finding from our side is kind of what the data show versus an insight explaining why it matters. So a finding is more descriptive. What do people say, do, select, experience, versus an insight being more interpretive or actionable. So why does this pattern matter for this particular audience that you are communicating with? And what does it help us understand or decide? So once you've kind of gone through that process of shaping insights, and we were going through examples with folks at VSA to kind of understand more of that process. But once you have your insights, thinking about how do you communicate those, how do you amplify them, so it doesn't feel like just a report that's going to sit on a shelf, just a series of different kind of insights or bullet points. So thinking about how can you amplify that through visuals, quotes, how are you connecting it all together into something that feels more like a story. So we talked about these different storytelling tips or kind of perspectives. So how can you think like an author of knowing your audience, making connections, kind of storyboarding out the process, thinking like a journalist, so creating those hooks, so creating a compelling headline that gives your audience the so what, the perspective, so you don't have to sort through a lot of text, a lot of information to understand the main point, and using emotion throughout that process to weave in quotes, weave in visitor stories, remind folks where that data is coming from in the first place, that there's a human behind the information, and then thinking like an illustrator to tell that visual story. So reducing kind of chart noise, having icons, imagery, photos in that process. So mostly just trying to give folks framing for as they're working through their reports or their kind of other stages of crafting these stories. What are some tips that can help them make more compelling stories? So we did this kind of practice where folks were imagining there were audience researchers looking at recent exhibition studies. So we had them kind of identify some insights, thinking about how to visualize or amplify it, create those compelling headlines, and put it into storyboards. So I have those worksheets that I can share as well. And then for a recent other meeting, we did kind of a COVES specific example. So I can share those worksheets as well, where folks were kind of working through how to tell those stories. But I think it was an interesting empathy sort of building exercise when we're giving folks data that they were not necessarily familiar with. How do you tell that story? And some of that, like, oh, I don't know what this chart says. This is not the way that I would create this chart. And how do you kind of have in that moment, oh, this is maybe what my audiences are facing all the time. How do I kind of create more compelling visuals? So I think one of the most useful parts of the workshop was Carolyn walk through how to go from the chart that's on the right side to the chart that's on the left side. So if you have this thing that's on the right of what you've exported out from Excel that has all this messiness, okay, kind of take away some of your labels on the side, remove your grid lines, make your bars thicker, add some labels, take away some of those other axes because you have your labels on the side, change your kind of color contrast, use shading to communicate meaning, and then you can kind of think about how to add some more kind of context for things and where you want to help your reader understand things a little bit better. But that is what I have.
Amazing. Thank you.
Okay, and
And back
I
to Courtney.
Saved by the bell. Taylor, my incredible research assistant, is going to share screen. So I presented, this is a little bit of a change of direction because I work at Discovery Place, and so we were focused on different types of community voices and methods that we can use to match it. You can go ahead, Taylor, to the Discovery Place side. So as you can see from this side, I was one piece of a 3 museum session, and so Sid presented on looking at child versus adult data and how we kind of adapt the method to be appropriate for each. At Boston Children's Museum, we had Locke present on using playful evaluation methods to work with children. And then I focused on ways that we can do different types of methods, surveys, interviews with children by using gamification methods. So that's what I'm going to talk about briefly today. So next. Oh no, I thought I'd hidden all the slides. Okay, I'll keep going until you get to the Discovery Place slide. I'm so sorry, y'all. I should have used my PC. Well, as she's doing this, so we, Discovery Place, I know there's a lot of discoveries. We have 4 museums. And so one of the really cool things about that is that we get to actually see how there are differences in our evaluations, methods, and results in different communities. So we have 2 children's museums, which obviously focus on early childhood. So birth to about, we say 8, but birth to 6 is that prime age. We have a science museum, which is lifelong learning, and then a nature museum, which also falls in that lifelong learning. So because we are really sensitive to our different audiences, it's really important to us to kind of match our methods. And so for early childhood, because there's all sorts of restrictions, executive function is more limited at this age. So their language, their understanding, their ability to express it, to read and write. But also abstract concepts are really in those early developmental phases. So we try to make sure that we evaluate them in ways that they don't realize they're being evaluated. That's, in my opinion, probably one of the best ways to evaluate in general, but it's particularly effective for young children. So that's what I'm going to be presenting on today, one very specific gamified evaluation that we used for a project funded by the Lilly Endowment. So as part of that endowment, we were charged with children's museums finding ways to foster character development. And so we decided, because character values are abstract, they're pretty complex, that we wanted to find a physical, concrete way to illustrate them. So we came up with the idea of, after we had identified the kind of 6 core values that we wanted to teach children, creating a character that embodied and personified each of those values. So our values being teamwork, compassion, grit, integrity, and curiosity. Together, those values make up our characters, the Wonder Wise. Next. So how did we actually design characters for them? Because obviously we have ideas of what those values, so many technical difficulties. We have ideas about what those values might mean, but we really wanted it to represent how children think about them. If you're able to go back, Taylor, another slide. One more. So we started out by looking at very basic features and working from there. So at the very beginning, we were literally looking at what colors kids think of when you say compassion or integrity. And then once we started to actually build out the characters, we would identify 2 traits or physical attributes that we wanted to test. So in this case, I'm going to be presenting the data on the body shape of the character and then the eye size of the character. And so we would create all of the different permutations of that. So you can see all of the different pairings between a 2 parts body and a kind of combined larger body, and then small eyes and large eyes. We would then create what was actually a Qualtrics survey that would counterbalance which 2 designs were getting compared for each question, but we had it masked as if it was a child's game. So they thought that they were picking who they were going to play with, and it would appear in a scene with them. So it was a very interactive, fun activity for them. So we had, for this specific question, 115 kids, kids as young as 2, because we did not rely on any verbal language with the exception of 1 explanation. And so we basically went and we iterated on this to develop our characters. So now you can go to next. So we asked a range of questions because we do have our characters in graphic format, in puppets, in life-size mascots, and plush. And so we really wanted to think about this holistically. So we looked at kind of overall preference of who they liked the most. We did this both as a forced choice between 2 randomized characters, as well as presenting all 4 of them at once and asking which they liked best and rating that how much they liked it on a 5-point scale. Next. We also looked at 2 kind of different dimensions or contexts that we might encounter these characters. So one of those being kind of play preferences, like who they'd rather be friends with, who would they rather play or do an activity with, as well as because these characters are being presented to them in stories, in puppet shows, who they'd want to see have a story told about them more, or who they'd want to see star in a show. Next. So you can see, fortunately, for this particular set of attributes, we had a very pronounced trend. You can see that across kids, they almost all preferred a particular design, the one with the body in 2 pieces, so a head and a torso, and then overwhelming preference for those larger eyes. So that is the direction that we went in, and again, altered attributes for the next stage of testing. But we did notice, and I don't know how well you can see it here, but there's a slightly different trend for compassion relative to some of those other characters. So you'll see for both creativity and curiosity, even though you'll probably don't know which ones those are, but the blue and the green, there was like 15% or less who liked any body type other than that kind of smaller 2-part body. But for compassion, it was actually 26%. So that was noticeably higher. So if you want to go to the next one. This led us to do some probing, more semi-structured interviews with children to see why we were seeing this difference. And what we heard from kids is that for compassion, they really think about like somebody big and fluffy who they can hug, a big heart, open eyes. And so as a result, that directly translated into a slight difference in the kind of sizing and proportions of our compassion character. Everything from the shape that an icon that we selected, the color, their sizes were all influenced at each stage by iterative testing of these different questions. So one example over on the far left, that's Quest. we tested whether kids preferred Quest as our curiosity character with glasses versus aviator goggles for like going out and exploring. There's actually an overwhelming preference for glasses. Similarly, here, this is actually not our most current version. We do have a version of Scuff, our tiny blue one. That's our great character. Here with a Band-Aid, we found that kids didn't pick Scuff as often as other characters as their favorite because they found the Band-Aid to be kind of aversive, made them think of doctors in pain. So that got switched to a lightning bolt. So just a couple of examples of ways that through using, randomization and counterbalancing of very specific design attributes, iterating across hundreds and hundreds of models, we were able to create characters that reflected kids' preferences and how they think about those character values. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to keep us moving because we are quickly going to run out of time. Next, we have Bryn and Alyssa from Data to Dialogue.
Alyssa, do you want to share screen or do you want me to?
I can. Give me a sec, unless you have it faster than I do.
You go for it.
I think you can see it at least.
Cool. Yes.
I'll figure out how to make it.
Cool. Yes, I'll start talking. So this presentation that Ellison and I did with Maya from MWA Insights and Rafaela from Nelson Atkins was kind of inspired by a VSA talk that happened 10 years ago. So you can go to the next slide when you get a chance. That was kind of looking at broadening our thinking about multilingualism. So in 2016, it was a lot about how much should we translate? Should content be bilingual? And then this kind of session, as well as some articles thinking about how do we push this idea of multilingualism more generally. So when we look at 2026, 10 years later, you can look at the next slide. Many museums have expanded their multilingual interpretation. We have better evidence about design, workflow, and visitor use, but we're still really navigating institutional voice, community voice, how feasible it is to include multiple languages in a museum, thinking about which languages are included and who gets to decide, and how multilingualism shows up beyond exhibitions. So pass it back to Alyssa.
Yeah, and we wanted to add this first slide here, like consistent findings. Maya's not here with us, but there were things as we were putting together this presentation that we had found like, yeah, we're finding that too. Everybody is kind of finding the same sort of universal things. So some of these findings that we found across the board are that visitors really like to have the labels written out. That's like most accessible for most people, but they also don't want the burden of having to translate. And so we have a short quote here from the Nelson Atkins. I don't use my cell phone to translate. Technology is a little bit difficult for the person, so making it easier to access. And then we also found that Spanish-speaking visitors often rely on others in their group to translate, especially children. And that's not necessarily something that the children want to do. And I'll talk a little bit later about a focus group that we had where we had a mother-daughter adults in our focus group, and the mother was saying, well, I just use my daughter to translate, and the daughter is saying, yeah, but I don't want to. And then language is a tool of social inclusion. So prominent translation signal welcoming and inclusion for everybody. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did. My colleague Rafaela also presented with me. I'm not going to try to summarize all of her information. I'm just going to talk about from the evaluation standpoint. So I wanted to share first the evaluation instruments that we are using. We started out with translations for instruments where I have like up in the corner here turn the page in order to get to the Spanish version for a paper survey. We also have things like, click here if you need Spanish. And now we've changed that so that we are presenting all of the questions and the response choices in English and in Spanish. So they don't have to opt in or do an extra step in order to get to that translated version. And then we also found that translated, to echo the finding above, translated labels are the most equitable way to provide bilingual information. We're always asking on our exit surveys of our special exhibitions what people did within the exhibition. 90% of people are always reporting that they have read the object labels, so we know that that's a high level of engagement. We also have people saying that they prefer to have multilingual content provided as printed signs and labels. We asked this question where we said, would you prefer printed or QR codes, touch screens, audio tours, any of those options? And overwhelmingly, people want printed signs and labels. And then I wanted to talk through a couple of the evaluation findings that we have, where we're asking people, what languages do you speak? This is across several different exhibitions. This first one, a layered presence, is a little bit wonky because the entire exhibition was not translated, but it was the first exhibition that we did that had partial translations. But Survival of the Fittest and Painted Worlds were both completely translated. And we can see people reporting that they speak Spanish at home, 4% for Survival, 15% for Painted Worlds. But we also asked the second question of, did anyone within your group use the Spanish or find it useful? And then you can see, almost doubling of the number of people who found it useful. So asking that on the individual level, not as many people who would have used it, but then asking on the group level, more people are using that. And then we also are asking about bilingual texts, how much they appreciate seeing it. This is for our Painted Worlds exhibition, so we have updated this for our current exhibition, and all these numbers are a little bit higher. I wanted to highlight here, 40% of people said that increases their likelihood to come back in the future. That is about 55% now for our current exhibition. And then we did have a focus group, and I've included all of these materials in a Google Drive, so we'll get that over to Allison so everybody can see all of these.
I'm gonna have you wrap up because we are quickly
yep,
running out of time.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so you can take a look and see those, but we have some additional findings there. And I will let Bren.
I'm gonna say 2 words. Yes. So if you go to the next slide, sort of where are we now? All of our content is translated. These are the languages that we have. And then if you go to the next slide, this is sort of how did we get here? A decade of studies, but if you skip ahead 2 slides, we'll say this is not settled. We can kind of share more of this, but it's a constant iterative process to get things translated. So I will pass it back to the next person. Yep.
I'm sorry to cut y'all off. We are quickly running out of time, and we had 2 more, and I don't think we're going to be able to fit them in. But if Alyssa or Megan or Beth want to give like the 1 minute, and we can share some resources after the call today. Maybe without slides. We can.
Okay, I'm good. Okay, let me stop sharing. Maybe somebody else wants to go while I fight with this.
I can't see Beth, but I don't hear her. So Beth, jump in if you want to add to this. But we talked about evaluation emergencies. we talked about like what an evaluation emergency looks like the fact that it's usually like out of nowhere, last minute. People are like, "Oh, help, a grant is showing up. We need stuff right now," or like, "We're making this decision and we need to like back it up with data." And so it usually ends up being something that you're like, "Oh my God, it came out of nowhere." And so we talked about what that looks like and then how to triage. And so, you stop and say, like, hey, what's the emergency? With our capacity and resources, like, what can we do? And so it looks at like things like meeting as quickly as possible and like looking at different approaches. So maybe you can't do like a full-fledged evaluation, but you can do like a smaller evaluation. Maybe you choose like an easier sample population to get, right? So instead of doing like a huge survey, you're like, hey, we have some volunteers that can answer our questions. Um, Getting support from both your manager and then also from the people who are asking for the evaluation. So like, can they be part of the evaluation? Can they help analyze the data? Um, and if you have to say no, there are lots of reasons that you might say no, like maybe it's outside of your scope. Maybe the decision's already been made. Thanks, Beth. I was like, there are no slides. This is off the top of my head. Maybe ethics are involved. Maybe there's no cost. So like really being strategic and thinking like, how much can we help? We don't want to say no. If we can help, what's the like bare minimum that we can offer? And we want to keep everybody happy and be a team player. And also like, how do we keep this from happening in the future by like showing up and consistently being like, we're evaluation, please reach out to us immediately when you need something. The end.
That was amazing. All right, we are at the end of the hour. Thank you all for speed running your sessions. I would like to reiterate that everyone had at least an hour, and some of these were 2-hour workshops, and we've condensed them down. And so if you get an opportunity to go to VSA and like actually settle into it, it's amazing. I highly recommend. And thank you all so much for sharing your sessions. I think it was an excellent, um, a beautiful summary of evaluation and different approaches.